Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to go somewhere we don't often go. The very top of our houses. The attic. Some of you may not even have attics, like me, but I'm sure you'll appreciate that they can be creepy and dark places nonetheless. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Every summer, I go upstate to a little retreat called my grandparents' house. It's a nice pad, a big place with lots of rooms, in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty quiet for the most part. It's pretty much in the middle of the woods, and our nearest neighbor is quite a way down the road. There's plenty of space in that house, with 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 3 floors, and an attic. My grandparents never ever use it, and I basically got the basement all to myself. It was a sweet setup. There was a bathroom, a fridge, a television where I play my games console, and a comfortable couch to lounge around all day on. It's the perfect retreat to relax and unwind in peace, when I wasn't running around exploring the woods, of course. It was a typical Friday afternoon for me. I'd just gotten done work around 5 p.m., the most tiring part of the day where the sun is shining, and I'm tired most. I'm ready to unwind and settle down for the rest of the night, when my grandparents inform me that they're going out to catch a show with friends and have dinner, so they'll be back later. I was stoked to hear this, as I love having the house to myself, especially after a long day working. After ensuring everything is off and all the doors are locked, I see them off and order a pizza. After it arrives, I retreat to my little man cave in the basement and lock the door so if I fall asleep, my grandparents won't wake me up if they decide to check on me when they arrive home. Everything was going pretty great. A few hours pass at this point, and the sun is completely down, concluding a very lazy Friday afternoon. It's roughly 10 p.m., and I'm in the middle of watching my show when I hear the floorboards creaking upstairs, the signal that my grandparents have returned home. It sounded like there were 4 sets of feet instead of 2, so it was a safe bet that they brought their friends over for company, which was pretty common. I hear chairs creaking and sounds of conversation, so I turn up my TV and lounge back. Before I knew it, I'm drifting off to sleep. And just as I thought it would happen, I hear the doorknob above jiggle. I just ignore it and relax. After about 2 hours of peacefully laying there, I decided to call it a night and head upstairs to my real bed. It's midnight now, and all quiet up above, so I assume everyone has gone to bed already. I get up from the couch and head upstairs to the first floor. I unlock the door, and a few of my kitchen lights are on, as well as the TV, but for some odd reason it was muted. I figure my grandma was possibly in the bathroom and was wrapping up her show or something. So I left everything on and walked over to the stairs to the second floor. This is when I realized something wasn't right. From the downstairs you can see the doors to every room. At night, when my grandparents are asleep, they usually keep their doors closed, or obviously the bathroom door closed if someone is using it. When I looked up, however, the upstairs was pitch black, and all I could see is every single door open. I called out upstairs, but I didn't get any response at all. In fact, it seemed as if this house somehow grew more silent. I walked over to the front window and looked out. Not a single car was in the driveway. I was the only one home. I called my grandparents to check in. They were still out, and they let me know it would be a late night. I asked them if they had stopped at any point back home, and they hadn't. Nobody had come home since 5. We weren't expecting any visitors either. The entire time, it was just me, in the house, alone. But I knew that I'd heard something upstairs, so I called upstairs to them. I checked around the living room as quietly as I could, knife in hand, and I refrained from calling out the police like a total idiot. My grandparents even offered to when I told them about the situation, but I opted not to. I silently checked the doors. They were all still locked, and I checked the windows. They were locked too. I sat in the living room and listened hard. It was just silence. After about an hour, the front door opened and my grandparents were finally home. Their presence calmed me down a lot. We searched the rest of the house and there didn't seem to be any sign of a break-in. There weren't any other incidents after that, and my grandparents had actually moved since then. I wasn't really able to sleep well in the house after that night. It always felt like I was being watched. Always. To this day, I'm not really sure what it was. The reason I'm sharing this with you now is because one thought dawned on me. We never did search the attic that night, nor did my grandparents ever go up there. There was so much space in the house, there was never any reason for us to. But maybe, just maybe, somebody else did. A comforting thought to have was when the entrance to the attic was in fact in my bedroom. I work in a haunted salon, and I've had so many experiences here. The salon is an 114-year-old shotgun house with super high ceilings and pocket doors. It's located in an industrial area in the south. I think the house was relocated because it's super out of place. They bought the house back in the 90s for $20,000 with the intention of bulldozing it and expanding their family company next door. However, the city wouldn't let them because it's the oldest house in the town. It's been vacant the whole time they owned it, except for a brief period when her cousin lived in it. It didn't have any power or plumbing, so the cousin ran a hose and extension cord from next door. They had to gut the entire place during renovation. The inside was rotting and falling apart. It's beautiful now. They preserved the pocket doors and kept the same layout. The natural light is amazing. I love working here. It's just me and Dee that work in the house. She does facial and lashes and I do hair. So, on with the good stuff. When I first started, Dee told me the batteries from the thermostat kept going missing. We have cameras all over the salon and outside. She would watch the cameras and nothing would show up. One day pretty recently, we had someone working in the attic. She came down and said, "You know there's a bunch of batteries up here, right?" Another time, and this is my favorite story, Dee and I were working on a Saturday. She poured a glass of wine for her client to replace the cork. I remember watching her do this because she flipped the bottle upside down to make sure it was secure, and I thought it was funny. She put the wine back in the fridge and did the service. After she was finished, she left for the day. I left to run an errand, and when I got back from the salon, I came to find wine all over the floor. I look in the fridge, and the wine doesn't have a cork in it. The cork is on the top of the fridge. I texted her something along the lines of, "You forgot to put the cork back in, you dumb hoe." And she responded, "You watched me cork the wine and laughed at me." I told her to watch the cameras, so she did. The cameras showed me walking out the door, and then they go offline. A few days later, Dee was alone doing facials. She shuts the door when she does facials and massages, and mid-facial she heard someone walking up and down the hallway. She thought it was me because I wear boots to work, and it sounded like someone in boots. Then it sounded like someone slammed against her door, so she walked out and there was no one there. She watched the cameras, and there's nothing, no one in the hall. I hear knocking, walking, and even faint talking sometimes. I don't feel super scared. I get a little freaked out when I'm in here at night by myself, but for the most part I don't feel threatened. When I first started, I posted a bunch of pictures on the space on my Instagram. One of my friends stopped me one day and said, "I don't know if you're aware, but there's a presence in each photo you posted." I didn't think much of what she said because I didn't see the presence she was pointing out. It's weird when other people bring it up with no context. Dee had a client in her mid-60s pull her aside after her service and said, "Baby, you got spirits in here. They're not evil, but you might want to open up a Bible and let them find their way." Last night, Dee closed up the salon. We're all super vigilant about turning lights off because this house would burst into flames if there was a spark. She turned everything off and the doors lock automatically, but we always check because it's in a kind of sketchy part of town. She comes in this morning and every single light is on and the front door is wide open. Nothing was moved. We both have cash laying around and none of it was missing. It was weird. Everything begins when I was in my early years of high school. My sister, quite a few years older than me, moved out of our family home and into her first apartment. My mum was seeing someone new for the first time in a decade after her divorce with my father. My soon-to-be stepfather's children would soon have a room in our house, which was my sister's previously. It was the summer, and I, a young teenager, often spent my late nights on the couch downstairs, video chatting with friends on my laptop. On one particular night, it was about 2 a.m., and my friends and I had just disconnected out our video call when I heard a peculiar noise at my feet. The sound most closely resembled nails scratching at the pillows near my feet. I was immediately filled with dread, and my legs began to grow colder. My laptop was on my chest, cutting off all view of my lower body, in fear of what, or who I might see if I looked over or around my screen. I called my mother from upstairs. I was facing the stairs, and when she came halfway down the stairs out of bed, I asked her, "What's sitting by my feet?" She angrily replied, obviously, since I had woken her, "Nothing. What's the problem?" I felt better, but not enough to stay downstairs. I went upstairs and climbed into bed for the night. I always sleep with the TV on and my door open, and fell asleep just fine, but was awoken abruptly in the middle of the night. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia was playing. It took me a moment to realize what was happening, but I soon grasped what the gang was doing. They were digging up a grave to steal the jewelry from a corpse or something like that. I was really too young to appreciate the show. And soon after, the characters opened the uncovered coffin, and the camera showed the rotting corpse wearing a white dress. The camera zoomed in on the rotting skull, and my bedroom door slammed shut. And the same scratching sound from earlier grew louder on the pillow right next to my head. I pulled the blankets over my head and forced myself to fall asleep to escape the hell I had found myself in. Some time passed with no further activity. I found myself in the hospital. My sister was giving birth to her first son. I started to tell the story to my aunt, who had lived in the house as a child. She explained that these sorts of things were in no way strange. I was perplexed. She described that when she was younger, a woman would often appear behind her at the top of the stairs. She described that my mother had seen the same woman as a child, but as an adult never admitted it. Actually, whenever I brought it up, my mother only slightly smiled. I believe it was part of her coping process in order to continue living in the house for years to come. Soon after my sister got out of the hospital, I brought up the events to her. She was very calm and described that when she lived in the house, a woman in a white dress would come down from the attic, walk into her room, and stand there silently staring at her. She described the woman would always have long black hair draped over her face, My sister told me she would often ask the woman what she wanted, and after receiving no reply would ask her to go away, which she respectfully did, returning to the attic. After this, perhaps it was just the fear of what I had been told. I always swore that I saw the same woman lingering throughout the house, always from the corner of my eye, drifting into my sister's old room. Late in the summer, there was a night when my family, which was now me, my mum, and my soon-to-be stepdad, were gathered around downstairs in the living room. My mum asked if I could go up and close my sister's old bedroom door, which was located at the end of the short hallway, so that the heat didn't draft into her vacant room, but rather into the two occupied bedrooms. When I approached the dark room, I reached my hand normally towards the knob, but as my hand touched the brass handle, things changed. The door flew shut in my face. Immediately I thought that someone had broken into our home and was in my sister's room. I tried the knob several times, but the door was locked tight. I ran downstairs and explained what happened, and that it was probably wise that we leave the house to call the police. She didn't believe me at first and asked, laughing, that we go upstairs and inspect the door. So I grabbed my little league bat and 3 of us went to check on the door. Each of us pulled on the knob and were unsuccessful. We heard movement from the room and my mum and I went outside to wait in the car with the police on speed dial, as my stepdad attempted to get into the room. Eventually, when nothing terrible happened, we went back inside and approached the door once more. My mum, not believing in the ghost stories that had swirled through her home for generations, simply said, "All right, that's enough, just open the door." As she reached for the knob, the door swung open before her hand could touch it. I went inside, checking under the bed, behind the door, and in the closet, but found nothing. My grandfather used to come and visit us quite often before he passed. It was quite easy since he lived in the house he had built next door. Once he had given our house to my mother. He described to me a story that, although I couldn't tell if it was just messing with me or not, he pointed to the large oak tree in the center of our backyard and said that a long time ago a man and a woman lived in the house. The husband had gone insane and killed his wife in the house before going to an oak tree that stood right beside the one in our yard and hung himself. He continued to say that they cut down the oak tree where the deed had been committed, and they left the untainted one standing. What happened next, however, was too real. He took me for a walk behind his house into the woods. A few hundred yards in was a seemingly ancient cemetery. He described that in the cemetery was where the woman was buried, while the man was cremated. In all honesty, I really didn't think about this story too much. A lot of time passed with no significant events taking place. I had only told my best friend Dan of these experiences, and one night I planned to stay over to his house. We were much older at this point, juniors in high school I believe, considering that we were driving, still having an innate fear of the home I lived in, especially being there alone. I asked him to come with me to grab some clothes for the night. He came inside and followed me to the basement where my freshly dried shirts were and started yelling, "Come out, spirits! Come on, come out!" I explained to him, "Dan, the basement looks creepy, but everything bad in the house is upstairs. Please just stop. You get to leave here and not come back. I have to sleep here." He seemed to understand and didn't say anything more as we climbed the stairs, where all of my books and notebooks for the school year were presently stacked. However, when we went into my bedroom, he tried once more to get a glimpse in what I had been describing. As I knelt down to my lowest drawer to get a pair of socks, he began to taunt. As he stopped yelling, we heard a large crash down the stairs. "I told you," I said. When we peered down, we saw that all of the books had been thrown across the room. We didn't say anything to each other. We didn't try to clean up the mess. We just left. Years later, as I write this, the house has been seized by the bank in an equally complicated series of events. I live about 20 minutes from the old house as it sits, rotting. Sometimes I drive there and just sit in the driveway, staring into the upstairs window of my sister's old bedroom, wondering if there's a woman with dark hair staring back. Never once in my life did I go into the attic. The closest I ever came was when one day my sister and her now 2 boys were visiting. Her younger son and I were upstairs playing with trucks when suddenly he ran into the bathroom. The bathroom was where the steps to the attic were, which my mum had blocked off with several layers of plastic for whatever reason. I was terrified. He had run forwards, what I considered to be into the lion's den. I approached the doorway that went to the stairs, which went to the attic. I peeked in and could barely make out the child in the darkness. He was at the top of the stairs looking at the plastic, taking in his newly forming broken English to someone, something that had called him to the stairway that he didn't know existed. In a rush of courage, I sprinted up the stairs, scooped him up, and shut the door behind me for the last time before we moved out. I have been fortunate enough in my brief time on this earth to have had many paranormal experiences. I recently noticed activity has spiked at my house as well as my girlfriend's, but the activity at my girlfriend's is much creepier, unfortunately for her. My girlfriend has talked about how she always has these uneasy feelings whenever she's home alone, and about the experiences her older siblings have had and such, like knocking and scratching. Her siblings have long since moved out, and both her parents work and travel, so a lot of the time it's just me and her at the house. At the house, they have a walk-in attic. Basically, it's on the same level as the rest of the second floor, and both upstairs rooms share a wall with it. But the activity doesn't stop there. I first felt something was off, one of the first times I was staying over. No one was at the house except me and her, and we decided to call it a night. She went upstairs before me, and I went into the kitchen for water. I then proceeded to the staircase and felt the sudden urge to sprint upstairs as fast as I could. All throughout the night, we could hear what sounded like heavy furniture being shuffled around downstairs. My girlfriend was understandably in denial, and we eventually fell asleep. We awoke at 9 a.m. the next day, to what was the unmistakable sound of someone running up the stairs. At the time, her bed was against the wall that is shared with the stairs. I actually fell out of the bed from being startled, and we were the only ones at the house that weekend. Let's fast forward to the present. I'm in the house as I'm writing this. The bed shares a wall with the previously mentioned attic. On and off for about an hour, we've been hearing tapping and scratching on the wall behind us. I've already gone into the attic twice with all the lights on and an LED flashlight. I'm no expert, but I couldn't find any evidence of rodents or other pests. Maybe it's something in the wall. I'm a logical person and always try to debunk strange things before confirming them. However, given what we've already experienced, I'm not so sure. We'll just have to wait and see, I suppose. When I was about 5 to 7 years old, I lived in a house with my brother and my dad, where we always saw spooky things happening, and we thought it was haunted. One of the things my brother and I remembers from this house was a scary shadow. I was probably 5, and my brother was 2 years older than me. But I know this was not our imagination because we both remember the same thing. We were walking downstairs while my dad was in the shower, and my brother and I for a split second saw a large shadow behind the bar of a man who looked to be wearing a trench coat and a fedora. It disappeared right after we saw it. Another time, our cousin had came over to the house for a sleepover, and he was staying in the hallway upstairs. He was right next to the steps. He was a few years older than my brother and I. He was perhaps 11 or 12 when this happened. But when he was trying to sleep, he heard creaks and ghostly noises. He also claimed to have seen a shadowy figure moving around downstairs. The figure was wearing a trench coat or fedora. In our time at the house, many people have sworn to heard noises from under the porch. My brother and I would never go into the attic alone because we would hear things coming from the ceiling above my brother's room. I haven't been to the house in a long time now, and I'm wondering if we really were haunted by some spirits. My family and I moved into a new house, which is a 2x4 house. It used to have an attic but has since been sealed off. After a few months of living in this house, sometimes I'm just watching TV and hear scratching from the roof. I just play it off as being a bird. They're common where we live. And 3 weeks after the scratching, it got worse and more frequent. It's almost as if it were trying to scratch its way out of the roof. The attic entrance is above the outside of my sister's room, and one day my sister tells my dad the seal was open. My dad gets confused because it was supposed to be sealed off, so my dad goes to close it and realizes that it's really hard to open and close, so whatever opened it was strong. That's when I start to get skeptical. The same night I go to get a snack from the fridge. I open it to find out that they're gone. I think my sister must have eaten it. In the morning, my parents are going on about a missing cake. The cake was supposed to be for my niece's birthday. They ask if I had anything to do with it, and I say no, along with all my other siblings. I was getting very suspicious about the attic, so I built up the courage to go check it out. Please note, I am also probably the most paranoid person on this earth, so I was scared for my life, but the curiosity got the best of me. I get the ladder, a torch, and a knife just in case. I open the hatch. I shine my torch inside to see nothing. But as I search, I see the cake, empty snack pellets, dirty clothes, and a short, dark silhouette. It just freezes on the spot, and I immediately bolt and scream for my parents and tell them everything. They tell me to go stay in my room, and when they go and check it out, it was gone. I'm still in shock from that moment and get nightmares from it. We have since moved and no longer live anywhere near there. When I was in my youth, about 13 years old, my friends and I thought it would be a good idea to try and summon a ghost. So we set up a table with candles and such and started our seance. In the beginning, there was nothing, so we decided to leave the table and go out instead. We were at the attic of one of my friend's houses, and the door was not lockable. Weirdly enough, we couldn't open the door, but also all the windows were shut at the time, and the whole room felt charged with electricity. After a few minutes, the door opened by itself, and since then weird things happened to us. I went to my imam instantly and told him about it. He said a prayer for me, and the problem was solved. He also said to me that we invited a lesser demon into our circle, and took my promise to never do such a stupid thing again. Since that day, I started to study occultism theoretically, and witnessed a few exorcisms in which I was really invited by my imam. So I can clearly say that the paranormal exists. I urge everyone to never try summoning anything, because it's not possible to get what you want. You're more likely to summon something far more sinister, which will not rest until it has taken you. My family moved into a new house roughly a year and a half ago, which they had to renovate. I moved in with them over the summer. The house itself isn't too bad. They're your typical creepy noises here and there, but nothing like the apartment I grew up in. That was haunted for sure. However, something off about the house is the attic. My brother and his girlfriend live up there, and they themselves have said it feels off. My brother's girlfriend has woken up with scratches on her body, and my brother himself prefers not to be up there too much because of this uneasy feeling. My dad and I were up there the other day to fix my brother's toilet, and we both kept feeling off and uneasy, as if someone were watching us, and I kept catching stuff out of the corner of my eye. This is the only part of the house where we feel this way. I stay in the basement, and I don't even feel that way down there. My family wants me to bless the attic. I'm not a religious person, however I do consider myself spiritual, and am also an ordained minister. Does anyone have any tips on how to go about this? Any prayers or objects I should have in my hand when I'm blessing the place? Any assistance would be greatly appreciated. Let me start by saying I didn't believe in ghosts before this. All of this took place in 2014, in a small town in New Jersey. New Year's Eve going into 2014, and I was at my old friend Jay's house. He would always tell me about his house being haunted, and told me that the majority of the activity was confined to the attic. We decided to go up there and do a voice recording. I couldn't believe my ears when we put it on the speaker. We actually caught a voice. But much to my disappointment, my dumbass deleted it by accident. The rest of the recordings I do have though. So we told our other friend John about this, and he wanted to experience it for himself. Let me give you the layout of the attic. When you walk up the stairs, there's a little alcove to the left and a little alcove to the right. And when you get to the top of the stairs, there's a window on the back side of the attic. And when you turn around, there's a small room where the maid stayed back in the 1800s. Other than that, it was just a regular attic. Things scattered all over the place, holiday decorations, Jay and his siblings' old toys, and the like. So John, Jay, and myself went into the attic and put our phone voice memos on record. I put mine on in the main part of the attic, and John put his in the maid's room. We started asking the basic questions. What's your name? Did you live here? What year is it? After about 15 minutes, we decided to call it quits. I shut off my recorder, and John went to get his, and I heard chimes, and asked Jay if he had a clock in his attic, and he said no. I immediately wrote it off as my imagination. When John went to grab his recorder, he started goofing around. He walked into the maid's room and in a sarcastic voice said, "Hello," and then asked, "Is anyone here?" and grabbed his recorder and shut it off. When we put it on the speaker though, after John said hello, we heard a loud and clear shh, and then when he asked if anyone were there, we all heard a deep grumbling voice say, "Yes." Needless to say, we were all scared, but at the same time we were all terrified. However, we wanted more. It was like a drug. There wasn't much to do around in the area, and it was an adrenaline rush hearing that voice. The following week, I was with this girl I had a major crush on called Celia. She didn't believe in the supernatural at all. We showed her the recordings, and she insisted it was bull. She then started demanding to go into the attic. Jay didn't want to have any part of it, so he came up with us for a few minutes before we even turned on the recorders and said he wanted to go back downstairs and that he didn't feel safe up there. Celia also insisted on the lights being off when we did this. She said it would be more creepy. She didn't believe in it anyway, so we all thought it was a dumb request, but I had a crush on her, so her wish was my command. The lights went off, and she stood up next to me near the back window of the attic, and John stood in the maid's room. We started asking questions, and she had a sarcastic tone in her voice much like John did at first as well. She then whispered to me, "Does Jay have a clock up here?" I was taken aback for a second. I told her I heard the same thing last week. Almost immediately after I answered, we heard John from the maid room say, "Did you hear that?" As I was about to answer, thinking he was talking about the chimes, we all heard a child whimper. Celia freaked out and started screaming to get her the hell out of there, and that she wanted to leave. John stopped his recorder, and I escorted Celia into Jay's room and came back into the attic to grab my own. As she sat and collected herself, John and I agreed with her permission to listen to the recordings at that moment, but there was no child's voice on the recording. She started getting agitated because she knew she heard the voice. She wanted to go back up, and we all agreed. John also told me we didn't say goodbye to the spirits either before we left, and that wasn't good. So we went back upstairs, did another recording and said goodbye. That time we didn't catch anything, and the next morning I woke up to 5 missed calls from Jay. I called him back immediately, and he answered, which wasn't like him. It was early in the morning, and Jay never woke up until 11. He told me I needed to go to his house as quickly as possible. You need to understand, Jay basically lived alone in the house. His brother usually had to fly out to California for work, and his father, who was retired, did a lot of fishing in Maryland. So at this point, Jay had been in the house by himself for about 5 days. Jay was always terrified of going into his attic for as long as I can remember. He told me that the spirit pushed him down the stairs when he was 10, and that the only way he went into the attic was with at least one other person. He was also a terrible liar. So when he told me this, I thought he was playing a trick on me, but I soon realized that it wasn't. He told me that around 3 a.m. after we left, he kept hearing noises in his attic, like things were moving around. He wanted to go check it out, but didn't want to go alone. He asked me to go first. As I walked up the stairs, I started laughing, because everything in the attic was in perfect order. Now, there was a rocking chair and a wooden chair facing out the right alcove window, and another chair facing the backside window. The right side alcove was completely closed off, and there was a desk and some wood blocking it. I turned to Jay and said, "Funny dude, I thought you didn't like it up here." But when I looked in his eyes, I can tell it wasn't him that moved them. He was stricken with horror and frozen still. He tried to get the words out of his mouth. I asked him if it were okay if I did another recording. I put my phone down and began. I started to ask if it could throw things around or move something or hit me. Nothing. I opted to provoke it. I walked over to the rocking chair and had this feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach. I turned to Jay and said, "I don't like this dude." He chuckled, but we both listened to the voice recording back, and there was an old man's voice saying, "Get up." We didn't hear it at the same time, so we kept provoking and moving things in that little spot, and that's when on the recorder we heard a little girl say, "Why are they doing that?" When Jay and I heard that, we were scared. This wasn't like the first voice. This wasn't like the child we heard in the attic at this point. We realized something. We didn't know what, but we both had that same feeling. We both needed answers. I called John and told him to go to Jay's at around 8. I had class and was in barber college at the time, and I would meet him there. Then I headed to Jay's after class and met John and Jay there. We went up to the attic and started recording. We asked the regular questions again. We went back to listen and we heard the chimes that Celia and I had heard. I was pretty astounded to hear that, but we didn't catch any voices, so relaxed that next day, and I sent the recording to my friend Frank. He showed it to my friend Pat, who then called me, telling me to never go into the attic again. He told me that those chimes were the notes of the devil's triad. I tried to look it up but couldn't find anything, but I trusted Pat. He told me those chimes were to show that you worshipped the devil. This piqued my interest, and after I got a call from Pat, I told Jay that I had something to tell him, and asked to go over to his house, and he told me he had something to show me. I got to his place, and he was on the porch smoking a cig. I pulled out one and had it with him, and noticed he was holding a book. He told me he found it, and handed it to me. It was a Bible. He told me that he was renovating his basement space and it was behind a wall. Inside it read, "Presented to Roseanne Edwards by her cabinet, April 9th, 1862. He told me to turn to one of the pages. I forgot which page, but on that page was a dark handprint. He said it looked like dried blood. There's no way to verify that. I still don't know to this day. I told him what Pat told me, and he was taken aback. I told him we should go to the country clerk and find out more about the house. Before I left, I asked Jay to put the Bible in the attic to see if we could stir up any activity. I called Celia and went straight to the country clerk together. She asked to come to Jay's later that night, as she hadn't been back because she was afraid. We went through the documents at the clerk's, and we found something interesting. We saw previous owners up until 1910s, but after that we saw that it was owned by a company starting in the 1850s. The house was where they allowed workers to live, but there were no documents about who lived in the house. So all in all, nothing significant. We went back to Jay's that night and met John there. Jay said the house felt heavy all day. We all knew what that meant. The energy shifted the moment we walked into the house. We all felt scared, and none of us wanted to even approach the attic. Although we heard movement up there from downstairs, we didn't want to go up. I do regret that. I'm sure we would have captured something good, but we were all afraid. We left the Bible in the attic on Jay's request, and we all discussed getting a priest there to get the house blessed, but Jay didn't want to. I told my younger brother about it, and he didn't believe me. I went to Jay's house, where we all heard the noise, and then he refused to go into the attic after hearing it. Just as we were leaving, we stepped outside, and my brother and I heard a baby crying. It was at least midnight in the middle of winter, and my brother and I looked at each other confused. "Why is there a baby crying?" my brother said. It was getting louder, but then Jay interjected, "What baby?" We kept hearing it escalate in loudness. It got so loud I felt like I should cover my ear. "Don't you hear that?" I said. Jay didn't have a clue what we were talking about. That's when it just stopped. Jay had a weird look on his face, and his eyes got wide and he said, "Bro, look at your car." There was a small child's handprint all over the car. I was afraid to get in, and for the entire ride home my anxiety was peaking. I thought that if I would look in the rearview mirror, I'd see something, but nothing happened. When I finally got home, I was messaging Celia about what happened, and she told me that a cat had hissed at her. That cat had never done anything like that before, and when she walked into her house, the cat just hissed. As I was trying to calm her down, the bookshelf I have in my room came tumbling down, and a small metal box I owned went across my room and hit the wall and broke in half. Jay told me it felt like his house went through a small earthquake, and after our separate experiences, Jay agreed to have the Bible taken out. Activity significantly calmed down, and that was it. When I tell people this story, I always wish that I had a better ending, but something tells me that this isn't over. 3 years ago I moved to Florida found a job in a shop, and people in the shop were telling ghost stories. I never brought mine up. When I tell people the story, I feel like they'll think I'm crazy, even though everything you've just heard actually happened. I don't think people believe it, so I don't tell them until I know them relatively well. Anyway, they were telling stories, and one person pointed to me and said, "This guy had a story." And I thought he was pointing to someone else, so I looked behind me, and he laughed and said, "No, you. That shadow let me know. You've got something attached to you." He then proceeded to tell me the story of Jay's house. I felt like I wanted to cry when he told me. Ever since then, I've started doing investigations on my own. Around 2 years ago, my mum told me to go to the attic to put away some decorations from Halloween. I made a few rounds when I noticed the cat at the corner of my eye. It had no body or head, just white ears, legs and a tail. When I told my mum about it, she went into the attic to try and find the cat, but found nothing. The other time I believe I encountered it was when I was walking to my parents' room. I started hearing a cat screaming at the door of the attic. It sounded like a young kitten, but none of the cats screamed like what I heard. I opened the door, and the screaming stopped. When I told my mum about the screaming, she went up to find my oldest cat under the guest's bed and nowhere near the door. I'm not sure if it's the spirit of my neighbor's cat that died a few years ago, because of how the patterning was, as it looked familiar, or if it's something else entirely. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's ventures into the attic. I used to have an attic. Don't anymore, not where I live. It was certainly quite creepy, humid, and yeah, just not the funnest place. So many cobwebs, spider webs and the like. Anyway, if you liked today's video, please be sure to let me know. I'd like to give a huge thank you as always to my wonderful and incredible patrons for your dedicated support. It really does mean a lot. So thanks guys. If you'd like your name on screen in the end credits of every video, as well as a plethora of additional awesome prizes, feel free to check out the link to Patreon. All help and support is of course incredibly appreciated. So yes, have more stories for you tomorrow. More likely than not, it will be polled, but we'll have to wait and see. But for now, guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.